Good afternoon, everybody. Terrible names to our Estonian friends online, and welcome whether you are here in person or joining us virtually. My name is Jared James Lash, and this year I serve as the 14th UNA USA Youth Observer to the United Nations, and it is truly my pleasure to be moderating today's official side event as part of the United Nations Economic and Social Council's 2026 Youth Forum. Now, if you have attended ECOSOC before, Youth ECOSOC, you know how crazy it can be. And I deeply apologize that we had to run straight here from the UN and really appreciate your patience so that we can kick off today's conversation in due course and be able to dig into the discussion that we're going to have. It is really a pleasure to be jointly hosting this with UNA USA, with UNA Estonia, and with the Zero Hunger Project. And I have to admit that this is particularly interesting for me and carries a personal meaning because my nephew is Estonian American. And so the idea that young people can build something real across borders, it's really not an abstraction for the life in the Lash family. It's just a fact. And so we're gathered this week during the ECOSOC Youth Forum under the unified banner of Innovate, Unite, and Transform Youth Shaping the Road to 2030. And so why 2030? Well, 2030 is that time when we set forth the clock, 2015, the ratification of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, with the goal of 2030 being the end in sight for all of those goals. And if you look at the SDG framework, honestly, there is one goal that is a little bit different from all the others. Goal 1 through 16, well, those tell us what we're trying to achieve, right? End poverty, ensure quality education, build sustainable cities and communities, protect the planet. They describe that destination, what it looks like in 2030 if all countries hold to that commitment. But SDG 17 is that vehicle. That's what we're going to talk about today. Partnerships, financing, cooperation across borders and sectors and generations. Because truly, without goal 17, the other 16 goals are really no more than aspirational. SDG 17 is that infrastructure that we base it upon. And yet, when we talk about youth engagement, we often skip straight to the issues without asking the harder question. How do young people actually build partnerships that give them the power to shape those very issues? So that's the session that we're going to seek to answer today. Not in theory, but through the experience of those who have built those types of groups. And so I'm honored to introduce our speakers. First, António Pedro Tavares Pinho is a next generation UN fellow with the United Nations Foundation. He works at the intersection of multilateral institutions and the next generation of leaders and understands better than most what it looks like when young people are genuinely co-creating outcomes versus when they are simply invited to observe. Really well done yesterday with the conversation about the election of the next Secretary General and the work that you and your whole team have been doing to make sure that youth voices are part of the selection of the next SG in a way that's typically been a pretty murky process, I think, to the civil society space. So thank you for what you're doing in making sure that we see what that looks like. We were hoping to have a member of the Estonian Parliament with us today. Unfortunately, she is unable to join us, Hannah Lay, but I do just want to give her a shout out for her willingness to participate. She wanted so desperately to be here, but parliamentary duties called in Estonia, and she had to answer to that. But do appreciate her willingness to have been part of this conversation. Dr. Suman Roy is the founder of the Zero Hunger Project and Feed Scarborough. He built both organizations from the ground up, rooted in community need, and knows what the earliest and hardest phase of partnership building looks like, what it takes to turn an idea and turn it into an enduring coalition. Devin Gilmartin is the founder and CEO of The Canvas, the platform connecting independent creators and brands across the Sustainable Development Goals through fashion diplomacy. Devin has built it into a real vehicle for cross-sector partnership, having hosted the President and First Lady of Estonia alongside many other incredible dignitaries at his New York store. And he can speak to how young creators and entrepreneurs are finding ways into sustainable development through avenues that traditional diplomacy doesn't typically reach. We were also classmates back in college, so it's a pleasure to be a little bit ago. So it's a pleasure to be on stage together. And Felix Guo. Felix is the founder of ICEA Chess, a nonprofit using chess as a vehicle for youth development and cross-border connection. Felix has built a platform that takes an unconventional path into sustainable development conversations. And he can speak to how creativity and non-traditional approaches opens doors more than formal channels can often close. So after our panel discussion, just for a little bit of housekeeping at the top, then we're going to move into a time of roundtable groups, in person and online, built around one core question. What is actually missing between young people and the institutions that are supposed to partner with them? And what does it take to close the gap? So as we listen to the panel, have that question in the back of your mind, because we're going to give you all the opportunity to huddle with each other, discuss, and then bring back to the whole group. And my ask is pretty simple, that everyone here brings honesty to this conversation today. Because we need to continue to understand that SDG 17 will not be won by frameworks alone. It's going to be won by people in the room like this one who built something that lasted beyond any single summit. So let's get started. I want to open up the panel with a question to all of you all. I want to ask if you could briefly respond to this. What does it mean to provide meaningful youth participation in practice beyond symbolic inclusion? You know, we hear that word partnership constantly in this space. So what separates the real youth inclusion from the performative ones? I'll start with you, Doctor.
I'll just start with the story, because that's all I know is stories. So this was high-level political forum, HLPF 2024. And I was at the UN building, and each and every country, when they did their presentation, every country without fail talked about how important youth is, how youth needs to be engaged. It was so refreshing listening, though I'm youth at heart only, not youth anymore, but it was still very refreshing. And then I go into a side event, which was hosted by the major groups, and it was all youth in that room. There was almost around 300 youth in that room. And I'm from Canada, and our deputy minister was one of the speakers. So I was there kind of cheering her on. And I heard the whole conversation. And at the end, when the question session happened, I raised my hand. I said, the question is not for the panel, but for the rest of my fellow audience. And the moderator was kind enough to say, go ahead. And I said, who in this room really feels meaningfully engaged? Or is it just a checkbox that you are here at the UN, maybe on your dime, maybe in your government's dime, whosever dime it is, or do you really get engaged? And in that room, there was not even one hand that went up. And that itself is the big problem. And my deputy minister at that time said, well, Suman, you know it takes time. And my answer was simple. No, when we had, at that time, our prime minister was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. When Prime Minister Trudeau took office in 2015, it took him less than 24 hours to have a gender parity cabinet. He was the first global leader to do that and establish it. Then why can't we have one youth in a cabinet as a minister of youth and not an 80-year-old man? And that is how changes happen. And I'm very proud to say now there are 4 youth who are in our parliament, and our youngest member of parliament is 23 years old. So changes do happen if it is advocated, and that's what meaningful change looks like to me.
I first want to say, as you reminded, we were classmates, but the level of articulation and preparation that you put in for a panel like this is beyond impressive. I think everybody feels that in the room. I want to thank you for having us. I think when it comes to partnerships for the goals, and my role and all of our role in the global order right now, I think it starts with acknowledging the responsibility and opportunity that we have. I think if you're sitting in this room right now, you recognize that you can actually participate in these conversations. And that is at the heart of what we do at the campus. We started as a t-shirt brand almost 10 years ago. We were designing a uniform for a school called the Island School in the Bahamas. I was a student at the school in 2014. It's a sort of military style boot camp for sustainability. You're up at 6 in the morning, you're running, you're swimming, you're scuba diving for science class. And the founder of the school asked me to redesign the uniform. And that's how what is now the campus began. We pivoted into a retail company, and we started reaching out to landlords around the city, recognizing that there was a big issue with empty spaces in New York and around the world in every major city. And we said to these landlords, if you give us the space, we'll bring independent brands from around the world in, we'll activate it, we'll do shared revenue if it works, keep us there. If it doesn't, you can throw us out in 60 days. And that started to work. And so fast forward now, it's been a long and interesting 8 years, but we've now recognized that trade ministries, cultural industries, they have a mandate from their people to spend money to support entrepreneurs and their growth. And so we've tried to make it easier for them by going to them and saying, we will solve your problems. We'll do all the work in the realm that we know how to do it. Retail, growth, opportunity for brands and entrepreneurs. You write the check and we'll support these brands. But it's really not about the fashion, the jewelry, and accessories. It's about the people behind them. And the fact that SME enterprises are the backbone of most global economies. And I think everybody can be a part of that. And I think this conversation around partnerships to goals, it starts with recognizing that we, no matter how old we are, experience level, we can engage and we can talk to governments directly. We just have to break a few barriers in the meantime and not be very shy about it. I think, again, if we're here in this room, all of us are sort of, this is more like a circular dialogue. You know, we're sitting up here and we have an audience, but we're all sort of in this together and we have pens on. And I think we probably feel the same way, that no politician, no person is too above us to talk to. We should be able to get through to them and just break through. So I guess that's my attitude, is break through, don't be shy. Doesn't seem like anybody is.
It's great, Devin. Felix.
Yeah, so when it comes to this problem, I think the most important way I look at it is about responsibility. I think the key difference between a meaningful partnership and kind of just symbolic inclusion is how much responsibility you take. And I think, for example, in my chess club, back when I started it in 2021, that was when COVID hit and there was nobody doing chess. All the chess clubs were shut down, and I just thought to myself, why can't it be me? Why can't I be the one to start a chess club when there's no others that exist at this time? And I think it's kind of, a lot of people kind of shift their responsibility. They say oh, somebody else can do this. But I think it's kind of, you have to take that responsibility. And once you take that responsibility, you'll be more focused. You would want to dedicate yourself to accomplishing your goal. I think that really separates something meaningful rather than just something symbolic. And then also adding on to this, I think if you're partnering with another organization, I think what you really have to do is, first off, ask to see if you can take anything challenging and see if you can help improve not just your organization, but also theirs. Because when I was developing my chess club, I think one of my focus was also helping others. I think to actually create something meaningful, you also have to not just think about yourself, but also think about others. So for example, my first ever partnership was with the Wendy Museum. It's a free museum that's 2 blocks from my house. And I would just go past it every day when I'm going to school. And I think they had a really good mission of just trying to provide education for free. And I decided I wanted to just help them on their mission as well, right? So our very first tournament was hosted at their museum, and it promoted education for them as well. A lot of these chess players would go to their museum and receive this education from their museum. And I think by thinking first off of your responsibility and thinking of trying to help others, that's how meaningful partnerships start to happen.
Okay, thank you so much. And first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, and also just speak a little bit about the introduction of this session, because I love the way it was framed. And just to say that, yeah, I think it's really nice for us to think of this particular SDG as in the how we can reach the others. Specifically, as we now start thinking about what's going to be happening after 2030, this idea of implementation of how we can actually reach these goals that we have proposed ourselves to reach. This idea of the how, it's something that we're going to really be defining what follows the SDGs, because sometimes you feel like you have the problems, you have the objectives, then there is the pathway from one place to the other that is missing. And right now, for example, we have these SDG particulars to support us through the idea of partnerships, but the idea of implementation is something that's not really well-rounded in the way that we are presenting the SDGs and the global agenda right now. It's something that we have to figure out. So great introduction on that front as well. As for the question that you posed, I really do think that this is not so much a problem of visibility. And I love the approach that you have when it comes to responsibility. I would say credibility. Well, I do think that when it comes to visibility, the UN and other bodies, institutions already invite young people in. We already have a lot of young people in many positions, with, for example, with delegations. But it really is how we approach this inclusion. And for me, it's a problem of credibility, because you have to wonder yourself, like when you are invited into a project or to a session, to a campaign, whatever you are involved in, you have to think, really, was I involved in this since the beginning? For example, I think to think this in a way of a timeline is really helpful. Like, was I invited in at the end of the process where they just wanted a young face to be a part of this process? Or as we are designing what the process is going to look like, was I invited in a way that I could make a change? And this idea of credibility, it's something that I would put, just what Felix said, the idea of responsibility, I think it's really comes from the idea that young people, we need to defy expectations. Because unfortunately, there's no institutional authority to involve us right in. So we feel like we have a point to prove. And that's unfortunately the way that it is, but I think it really comes from the institutional authority that we still have to reach. So I would say that for us, it really is about responsibility, but it really is about credibility from the other side. Because if you don't have credibility, then you're just going to be invited in at the end of the process for you to be a face, for you to be a check. And at the end, the question I think that you should make yourself is, was my participation here, was this partnership something that changed the outcome or not? And that's the question that you should be asking, and to know if you were actually engaged or not.
So I want to ask you all to make a case for your sector, what you're working on why what you work on really does support youth development and cross-border connection for hunger, for fashion diplomacy, for chess, and for multilateral power structures, right? Like, lean into that explicitly. How does your sector really help support broader youth development and our cross-border connection with each other?
Okay, so the organization that I founded and I run, it's called the Zero Hunger Project. We actually started building coalition only September of last year. And not even a year now, we are in every continent. We are in over 40 countries. We have around 150 members currently. And what we do is empower grassroots organizations who are working on hunger to do their job slightly better than they used to build capacity. And that is one of our main motto. And the reason it was so important, because once again, my experience sitting at the UN, when I hear the government speak, rarely are really the small grassroots organizations who are actually on the ground, their voice is never heard. They don't even understand how to be a civic society member of the UN. They don't even know that, because that's not what they really focus on. So how can we get that voice up in this building out at the UN in New York or in Geneva? And that was how we started. So it is really important to have these voices, and I'm calling it the diversity. Now, that when we talk about diversity, generally it's a very different conversation. But in this case, in my mind, it is diversity, because the diverse members that we have around the world, and having those voices, upholding those voices. And that is really important. The same thing goes with youth. Just change it to organizations, to youth, and it's the exact same principle.
I think I will use the example of Estonia along with the conversation today. Estonia, is anybody Estonian here, by the way? Only Bogdan. It's on, so you can see live.
Yes. I think we have some Estonian friends online.
Perfect. Well, to our Estonian friends, I think after my own country, the United States, Estonia is my favorite country by far. I've been there 6 times in the last year. It's got a population of about 1.3 million people, about 1 million ethnically Estonian, the rest ethnically Russian. It is on the border of Russia, so it's strategically extremely important. It is a member of NATO and the EU. All of that said, there's still a gap between the United States and Estonia. There's no direct flights from New York to Tallinn. But the way that Estonia governs, the way that they came out of their membership of the Soviet Union into independence, one of the first states to do so. And their president at the time in the early 2000s basically said to the entire country, we're going to focus on computing, on computer science, on software. We're going to become a leader in the world at that, and that's going to be our moat, and that will be what protects us from the future invasions that we've been suffering for the last 800 years by the Danes, by the Finns, by the Germans, by the Russians. And so that's what they did. And 20 years later, they have more unicorns per capita than any other country in the world. You can become an Estonian e-resident in a few days. You can start a business in Estonia in a few days. You can file your taxes as an Estonian citizen in a few minutes. I hope for my Estonian friends I'm representing everything correctly and properly, but it's an inspiring country. And I think that the United States has a lot to learn from it. And on the flip side, as an Estonian designer, which is in the space that we work into the question of why is our work important, we had 15 Estonian designers arrive at our store in Soho about a year and a half ago. And they've cycled through, we've had designers come and go, but we have done significant business with Estonia now. And it got to the point where the president and the first lady came to our store at Soho, held a reception, brought Estonian business people and delegates. And now Estonians and Americans, because of this fashion connection, know more about each other. I have many more Estonian friends than I did 2 years ago. I know more about Estonia, and we're bringing people to Estonia, and I think Estonians are coming here to do what we do and work with us. So overall, this cultural bridge, I think, is the best sort of defense that we can have when we talk about soft power and hard power. I think this is smart power. It's the link between the two, because ultimately you need to show force, and there's different ways to do that. Technical capability, but also the ability to persuade to change. And I think that's where, as small as Estonia is as a country, on the border with Russia, they're sort of the Western line of defense in a way. I think it's critical that even in this moment where alliances are in question, that we directly, people to people, regardless of what governments are doing, support each other.
So, again, I think this is a great question. In my opinion, chess is one of the most universal games. Anybody from two different countries can easily play a game with each other and clearly understand what's going on. I think since my chess club is one of the biggest in California, I've made tons of connections with people from different countries. So about a year ago, one of my students actually had just immigrated from Korea, and he was talking about how the chess scene in Korea was pretty underdeveloped. So what ended up happening was in December during winter break, I went to Korea and I hosted an event there relating to chess. And because of that, I was able to bring the US's chess knowledge into Korea. So I think chess is one of these sports that can easily connect countries. And what I do in my club is we try to help clubs or communities that are still developing their chesscape, and help. A lot of these chess clubs are also run now by youth leaders, by people who are younger. And I think my mission in the IC Chess Club is to help them become successful. And I think chess is one of the best ways to help people develop their skills and also develop a bigger community.
Okay, when it comes to my case, and within the United Nations Foundation, we have Arbiter Regina, which is basically the department within the UNF that actually deals with young people. And what we come to believe is really in this idea of the strength of partnerships. And for example, we created the Unlock the Future Coalition, which is basically a space where a lot of youth organizations can actually contribute, and we can actually have a reach of more than 1 million children and young people. So that is a really big number, because when we don't have the influence, when we still don't have the space, we need to gather strength from other places. In this case, for example, in numbers, when we mix the different organizations. Sometimes we have, for example, youth organization of, let's say, for example, medical students. Maybe they have an entry point into the health discussions that are going on in the global stage. So when we have all of these partner organizations in the same space, we can gather these small strengths that one and the other has, and we can put them to a maximum. I think that's a lot of what the United Nations Foundation actually does. We also have a better bridge, for example, with the UN space. And that actually translates into practical projects that we can get people in. For example, as we were talking about, and this is a project we presented also yesterday, now we have the election of the next Secretary General of the United Nations. This is something that is far away, not only from young people, but people in general. It's something that the transparency of the whole process is something that has been improving, but it's something that people really feel disconnected with. What we believe is that we really need to gather young people into this discussion, and not only the ones who already interact with the UN. For example, you think that there's something that's being discussed within your community, within your country, and you want that to go to the global space. You don't know how to do it, it's okay. Because we did this through dialogues where we had capacitation of young people, how this process is done. We had a consultation that were online, so everyone would actually give some intake, and we got over 2,000 responses from young people through the world, some that were engaged with the UN, some that weren't, and now we really want to translate that into the selection process of the next Secretary General. And how are we planning on doing that and having a real impact? Because like I said, I really want young people to be in this project and say that my participation here is something different. So we are getting all of that input into a survey. And how are we going to translate that into action? We are going to make it so that the member states know what the youth priorities are. What are the subjects that they want to see discussed? What is this personality of the people of the person who's going to come next as a Secretary General? And the intake and the outputs that we have and your opinions on something that was maybe discussed at a local level and you want to see, that's probably going to be into the survey, and it's going to be valid into one of the questions for the person who is going to be the next Secretary General. So in this case, the United Nations Foundation found a way to have a bridge. We had a partnership with a coalition that actually allowed us to spread this message, get a lot of numbers, get a lot of people engaged, and that's how I think we can meaningfully get people engaged within the UN space.
That's great. Well, I'm hoping for those of you here in person and online, you're starting to think, there's something I'm really passionate about. You're hearing the stories of the power structures within the UN, of individuals who set forth a vision and started making that concrete. And so I want to start to dig into some questions that maybe will help individuals in the audience here in person and online start to think through that framework for themselves. So, Dr. Roy, I'm wondering if, for the Zero Hunger Project, take us back to the very beginning. What was the first best step that you took that created the framework for future partnerships?
I'm laughing because I don't tell the story.
Okay.
But I will.
Okay.
So it all started a few years ago. And a few years ago, I was honored to go to Bangkok to speak at a conference. And it was a room full of around 50 people. And when I was speaking, I realized I'm the most illiterate person in that whole room. Everybody else was PhD, professors, double PhD, and I'm just a community guy. But the conversation went really well. So when I came back to Canada, I said, I technically represented Canada. So people should know about this story. So what I did was I started reaching out to our minister at that time who was in charge of SDGs, because SDG was a basic framework of what we do in Canada. And those who live in a bigger country will know how easy it is to send an email to a minister and get a response. It's not. You keep on, you never hear back. And especially if it's not your elected official from your right. But one thing that I was very key on is persistence. I used to literally set an alarm on my phone and send the same email every 2 days. And every time I used to send, I used to add one more person from the ministry whose email address I could find online. Persistence. Finally, probably somebody in the office was like, this guy's not going to stop. Just meet and get it done with. And that's how it all started. So I think that was one of the key things that I always say, that it doesn't matter whether you're a young person. My daughter is 10 years old, and I teach her the same thing, that if you believe in something and you want something, you got to be persistent. Because all you're going to, worst case scenario, you're not going to hear anything or hear a no. That's okay. So persistence is my key, and I'm glad I persisted, because through that, I well, I became a representative of Canada at the UN on the Sustainable Development Goals for that meeting. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been representing Canada at the World Social Development Summit in Qatar and at the UN. If I did not persistently bug my minister, I would be sitting in my office in Scarborough, Toronto, even now.
I'm gonna be borrowing that tactic, don't you?
That's great.
Raise the stakes every time this guy.
Exactly. Add one more person.
Persistence, tenacity is a great tool in our toolbox.
Absolutely.
I love that. And you mentioned reaching out to individuals, not hearing back. Devin, I feel like you're putting it modestly in the spaces that you're describing, because right now you have a store at the World Trade Center in the Oculus building, a magnificent building. And you certainly didn't start there, right? You started with these other spaces, working your way up to that, but forming these concrete partnerships, reaching out to foreign ministries, foreign trade organizations that it was, I'm certain, almost always cold outreach. Walk us through that process. How did you identify these partnerships? How did you reach out to them, and how did you make it concrete to get from one small storefront all the way to the incredible location that you all are in today?
So there was some cold outreach there for sure, but I will say it actually came, in the case of Estonia, down to a friendship. I walked into the ambassador residence, the ambassador to the UN for Estonia, Mr. Tom Sard. 2.5 years ago. I was greeted by his wife, his spouse, Marilyn. She looked at me like, what is this kid doing in my house? I had a backpack on, everybody else had a suit and tie. I was invited, I was on the list, and I said that, I shared that with her. She rolled her eyes and said, okay then. But she was hosting an event for an Estonian brand. And by the end of the event, which was a cocktail event for this brand, Marilyn and I were seated on her couch in the living room, laptops out, ready to figure out how to do what they were doing in her apartment at scale and with more brands in Estonia. Marilyn and I became first friends and then quickly colleagues. She joined our team as head of retail and helped us open our Soho flagship store. And while she was doing that, we were also able to establish the connection with Estonia. So as I guess the lesson here, if there is one, is you can do cold outreach. It's sometimes the only way. Sometimes that's the way to do the cold outreach. But being in a room with someone, getting there is probably always better. Sometimes you need the cold outreach to get there. But if you can walk into a room confidently, even if you shouldn't be there, which is always a myth, there's a lot of people that shouldn't be in a lot of places right now. So,
No names.
Yeah, no names. Yeah, we're not here. We're on camera. I'm in the United States, unfortunately, sad to say. But point being, I think, get in the room, make yourself known, don't be shy. Same thing I previously said. But I don't even think this is an audience that needs to hear that. I think at the end of the day, it's people to people relations, and that's the most important thing.
And Felix, you talked about in your local neighborhood, somewhere that you're like, hey, that's a great venue. That's somewhere that could host chess, right? Maybe they weren't thinking of chess as part of their playbook. So what does it take to get institutions to take a non-traditional approach seriously when you do walk in the door?
Yeah, so I think I can take it back to my first partnership ever. It was the Wendy Museum. What hosted my first unofficial tournament in my backyard. And I basically just gathered some of my friends and their friends. And I was like, oh, come to my backyard, we're just gonna play some chess. And it was during around the second or third time we were hosting this unofficial tournament where just one of the museum directors actually was walking by my house. And they had seen that oh, there were so many people in somebody's backyard, lining up for one restroom. And he popped in and and during this time it was post-COVID. A lot of people were already, getting into chess. They had been playing a lot of online chess, but most people weren't actually thinking about, hosting tournaments. So what happened was I had, talked with this museum director, and I basically just told him our mission, right? And our mission is really simple. It's to bring chess education to more people. And it really aligned with their mission as well, which was to bring, historical education to more people. So I think a lot of, finding these, non-typical ways of collaboration is through finding some sort of shared mission. And this has worked for me in tons of alliances, as well, in other places as well. And I think it's mainly just conveying your simple mission, right? And trying to figure out how that aligns with somebody else's mission as well. Because a lot of times, especially with nonprofits, and free organizations, their main goal is to just provide education to more people or to provide help to more people. And that is exactly my mission as well, which is to bring chess education to more. So I think, in general, whenever you're trying to make new partnerships, is to try to first tell them your goal, tell them your mission, and then tell them how you can help them achieve their mission and your mission at the same time.
That's great. Antonio, for you, you all have been leading a youth-led initiative that I think has been very credible in the eyes of the United Nations. And you all have done a great job helping to support that. And so I'm curious, how can young people, my apologies, not the right question, but I have a good question. What helps institutions take youth-led initiatives seriously when you are showing up to school?
Yeah, of course. As I said, because we don't have this institutional majority, a lot of it actually comes to us in the way that we present ourselves. And it's great that we have projects and young people that are so passionate about what they do. Like what Phil just said, I think it's really inspirational. If you come into the room like this, it's great. And I really think that it's up to 3 points usually, which is basically legitimacy, clarity, and follow through. So basically, when I think of legitimacy, it's the way you really have to find a space, a community, a problem, something that you really want to see solved, and you feel like, okay, I have the best solution to this problem. This is something rooted in a cause that I really can present. Because if you're doing it just to show up, or just to try and be meaningfully engaged without really having a mission, eventually that's something that people are going to notice. Then when it comes to the idea of clarity, it's really the how of the question. Of course, you've identified a problem somewhere where you need to intervene. You really have to have a good process on how to reach your end goal, because that's what you're going to present. That's the project that you're going to have to propose to people. You're going to be wanting people nearby. If you want to establish partnerships, you need people to believe in you, and a lot of that is in the how. And then we have this idea of the follow through, because especially when you are doing these kinds of projects, you really have to step in and say, this is something that I want to see done, and something that I want to see last. This is something that's going to have a really high impact. And this is something that the partnerships and the relations that you create during that project, they have really to last. They have to be important. So this idea of follow through of this is not going to be something isolated where I invite you in or I'm invited in to participate. This is something that's going to have real consequences. So if these 3 ideas are present, I believe that we can have strong projects, and it's something why I believe that this campaign in particular worked, because we really have a clear objective, this idea that, and this big problem that youth were not invited to this conversation, so we wanted it in. We had the how, we had how to get the numbers, how we could actually try and change this process. We had to analyze how the Secretary General was going to be scrutinized, and how young people could get into this process. And then we have the follow-up, this idea that it doesn't just end up with who gets chosen. We get to present what we want of the person that gets chosen. What is the personality that we want, and what are the end goals that we want to see assessed when we are choosing that person. So, for example, in this initiative, we have all of these 3. So I think these are always 3 great points that we need to take in mind when we are creating a project that we really want to be seen and meaningfully be engaged.
And Antonio, that deliverable, that consequence that you mentioned for young people to know that their voice takes shape in these rooms, I think that there's a major milestone coming up for you all next week.
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much for that, because I'm really proud of the project that we are making. And next week on the 23rd, and please put it in your agendas, we're going to have a meaningful dialogue with the candidates to the Secretary General position. Basically, we have gathered all of this input from the consultations that we have done from this survey, and we are going to create a job description where we are actually going to present that to the candidates. And then we, along with the member states, who are actually the ones who are going to do all of this scrutiny, are going to moderate a conversation with these candidates so that we can actually have the youth problems and the things that we want to see being answered by the candidates. They are going to be in this section, and this is going to be a major first. Not only for young people, actually for the public in general. It's usually, there's not a lot of transparency within this process. And not only did we manage to get on this transparency train, we managed to get young people in that transparency train with this big session. It's going to be the first of its kind. So please, I do hope that we get everyone here. We have a lot of young faces really connected with all of this process. And if you have any doubts, please do follow the United Nations Foundation and our future agenda. And if you have any doubts, talk with me, because it's going to be a big process. And like I said, this is going to be the consequence of this whole project. And if you want to keep on going, we really have to showcase the consequences to everyone. So I think it's going to be a nice initiative.
Great. Now I have two more questions for the panel. Then I'm going to turn it over to those in the room and online to be able to hear directly from you all through the roundtable conversations that you're going to have. Now, I'd love to go down the line with all of you and describe to me how you measure success in a partnership. How do you know that it was worth your organization and their organization's while when you do partner together?
For me, I think the biggest thing is have the goal set. And not only just in your mind, but to write it down somewhere. And the success is when the goals are met. It is as simple as that. And if the goals are not met in the timeline, then at least there's a plan how to meet it down the road. It's never lost, but how do you actually grow? And the same thing with the SDGs. We know each and everyone sitting in this room, by 2030, the goals of SDGs are not going to be met. But that doesn't mean we give up and be sad about it. It's about what are we going to do on 2031 and how we're going to move ahead is what the plan would be.
I would very much agree, and you don't want to stop working together. If you want to stop working together, you might have been successful, but you don't really enjoy the partnership. That's not my kind of success, and you may not have been successful based on the KPIs, but you want to keep working together. I would say that's a very successful partnership, because what you set out to do and what you actually end up achieving can sometimes look very different based on the constraints of reality, which we're up against all the time. So mutual benefit and the desire to continue collaborating are prime.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I believe success, first off, is also just how long your partnership is. In my opinion, if you host an event with one organization one time, that doesn't really count as a partnership. That's just you guys working together one time. But a partnership is something that lasts forever. I've had tons of youth who have worked with me in my club, and they've been either coaches, assistant tournament directors, volunteers. And they've been in my club for 2-3 years. And I think that is an example of really good partnership. It's when you stick with something, stick towards a goal. And especially, as both of them stated, a lot of times your goals might not be met, but you should continue pushing. For my chess club, of course, my goal is a little bit more abstract. It's just bringing chess to more people. There's no, timeline. There's not going to be an end in sight, which is why I think you always, every day you should be, especially for me, I have to be working towards a specific goal. So I think it's good to have this long-term goal. You might never be able to finish your goal, but always, work towards that. And then the second point, which is more towards youth and youth partnerships, is I think, especially when you're working with a specific youth, I think they should always get this role where they're contributing directly to your organization. So in March, I hosted this tournament with over 1,000 players, and there were around 2,000 attendees to that event. And specifically, we were hiring youth volunteers to help out in the event. But, I've been to other events and I've seen youth just holding signs or directing people. I think that's a good way of partnership, but I want them to have a bigger role, right? So we started hiring youth to be assistant tournament directors, to, delegate, badges to players. I think that giving them a bigger responsibility and a bigger contribution is a more meaningful partnership and a more successful partnership, because they feel like they are contributing directly to your organization. I think that is really important when working with youth partnerships.
Yeah, and these were really great points, so it's hard to follow up, but I would say that an exercise that we can do whenever we have a partnership is when we are ending the project, or the project is going on for a long time, we just have to sit down and think just this idea of, did something change because this partnership was established or not? It's one of the critiques, for example, that we have for these SDGs, the idea of, yes, partnerships are good themselves, but there are good partnerships, there are bad partnerships, and then there are partnerships who actually do nothing. So I think that this exercise is really something that's really important. I'm sorry, but that's the way things are. We really have to look into the way that things would have evolved if that partnership was established or not, and think if that made a difference. And that's, for me, it's the first point and the one that you really want to have there, and the calls for what can be a good partnership and a good involvement, and if that was something meaningful or not.
It's great. Now I want to end with something concrete from the panel, a little bit of a lightning round, if you will. So for you all, what is one actionable thing that a participant in this room can do after they leave today to begin to strengthen a potential real partnership? And just one thing that you'd recommend that they do.
I'll say always bring your own chair. Most of the time, there won't be a chair in the room for you, chair on the table. So bring your own chair, push your way in, and get it done what you want to do.
Say know people's names. Go a long way.
Yeah.
For me, it's just try to talk with more people and try to understand more people's missions. Because for me, like, some of my partners have come just from simple conversations I had, for like a couple of minutes with specific people.
For me, I would say it is ask for a feedback loop. Like if you go into a project, you're establishing a partnership, if you are invited in for something, just if you are representing a project, some people, if you are a government even, believe in the mission that you are in, and then go there and feel like, okay, we're establishing this. What's going to be the end goal? How are we going to measure this partnership? And this has to be consequential. So ask for a feedback loop. Believe in yourself enough, especially because when it comes to young people, we often feel like, oh, I was invited into this. This is already a privilege in its own, but we really have to own it and to go and ask for feedback for this interaction, I believe.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to our panelists. What a fantastic conversation. Appreciate you all setting the table for them to then go into their breakout. I think for all of you, some hopefully actionable next steps for you all, whether you're helping combat hunger in your community, whether you're going to shop at the campus right after this, whether you're participating in the ST event next week, or you're practicing chess. My ELO score is probably 0, so I need to practice chess. I think there are all great ways to get involved with their organizations, but then also for you, with whatever your innate passion is. You probably have it. You've been looking at your heart this whole time. Hopefully some good, clear steps for you all as you approach that. So let's give a hand to our panel. I'm going to ask Bogdan, if you don't mind changing to the next slide, I want to jump right into the next portion to not waste any moments. And so what I'm going to ask is for you all to kind of cluster with some people around you, maybe groups of 5, 6. I think we have some supportive facilitators from UNA USA, GGAs who are going to support this. Is that right? So GGAs, raise your hand. All right, some Global Goals ambassadors who are going to try to help moderate these different sections. Cassie, could you help us? Yeah, okay, Cassie's one. Also from UNA USA. And go into your group and talk about what is missing between young people and the institutions, whether that's governments, UN bodies, civil societies, that are supposed to partner with them. And what is one concrete thing that could close that gap? We're gonna have breakout rooms for our online attendees as well. We're gonna spend about 12-ish minutes talking about this, and then we're gonna come back together as a team to debrief. Does that sound good? All right, great. I'm getting to stop very often.
We can
How much time we have, so we can keep going. Hi everyone, my name is Alex Monero, I'm Global Business Masters with UNA USA for SDG 11. Does anyone know which one SDG 11 is? It's good, no worries. I have instructions for us, and I will make sure I know everyone's name. Here is a schematic question that I'm going to try to follow. What is missing, and it's up there on the board as well. What is missing between young people and the institutions, such as governments, civic bodies, civic society, that are energy startups,
Cap CO2 solutions. Cap CO2 solutions. Develop sustainable aviation.
What you do now? Yeah, all the stories.
Alan Warren and introduce everyone.
Nice to meet you.
I'm Sita. I'm from like the DC, close to DC.
You spoke at session, right?
I did, yes. Thank you.
Does anyone have any thoughts or feelings about this question?
I think a huge thing is that I definitely think that needs to be heard is to ask students, whether in high school or in college, or across America, and ask them what the sustainable development goals are. They will not know, and even if they do know how to get involved in their community, that's something that like nobody, not many people would be able to answer. I feel like, especially if they're not. So even the organizations that we partners with, I feel like are not amplified enough when they work with communities. And I feel like that's one way, like partnerships need to change. Because like we need more people to know what the sustainable development goals are, and not only that, but they need to know how to act in their communities. They need to know what they can do, even if they're not founder of a nonprofit, or if they're not like in the
I agree with that. I think we're so many people today that just show up to these
Instead
things.
of these individuals coming to these organizations,
It's unfortunate.
because they want to help these
Yeah,
organizations,
and,
reaching out.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that a lot of people
That way they know
like
that
clouds and all that.
access.
And I think the biggest thing
If I'm in high school, right, if I'm in 11th grade or
with the idea that
I
you
don't
can
know
impact
any, I
change,
don't
I
know
think that is
about
just
these
a factor, whether or not you're able to post about
I
it
go
or
and do
not.
research myself, which I'm
I
not
agree.
really
That's a great point. Does anyone want to?
Yeah, exactly.
and I don't know whether it's something to tackle with education, like in schools and teaching.
Standing photo.
Yes, in their schools, or if it's like nonprofits that and just amplify those yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Having organizations more
But to like, I never did anything actually. So do you think like the UN should reach out?
That's what I work with. I feel like a lot of people right now are
So, everybody?
that's something that
Yeah.
Thank you. An initiative that I came up when I was in high school. We call it the Youth Action Labs, which are based in India. So basically, they're like essentially 12 youth boot camps that provide system SDGs like knowledge to high school students, and they work with plans to address one of the SDGs. Right, that SDG is based on the project they essentially developed to be like a prototype or to be and based on something that we could develop policymakers, and then we would actually help utilize their help in order to promote this idea at a national level. We want from a grassroots level. It takes like skill to process. Are you connected with the FAO at all? Why do you want the youth to buy the
And I think there's something like this is just I know this is specifically for the US students that are experiencing, but for example, there's a single goal of clean energy in mind, right? So one way I think that students can tackle it is with advocacy on their state level. So like in Virginia, for example, there's a huge issue with data centers, and tackling addressing that as students and lobbying legislators.
We care a lot about like sustainability, so on the local level, it's having that in your backyard.
Lobbying the legislators actually made a huge difference when it was from here, because there's usually like very specific communities that have to tackle that.
I know there's some great slides that you guys want to add on.
And from that, you can have real community or state level impact. And in other countries, like there are still local governments that students should be able provide input on policy.
Anyone who's writing a plan by chance, my pen has died on me, so I think there's a chance for recording these out, and I just want to make sure that I can accurately capture, because off the dome is not going to work. If not, it's I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
And that's also one thing that my nonprofit, which is focuses on. So it's called policy advocacy, connecting students and local legislators, and how to do that. There's resources for that, there's mentoring for that, and so yeah, any resources on how to do this. And basically, it connects students and legislators, whether virtually in person or just resources to help mentor them to learn how to meaningfully interact with legislators, and even if they don't want to, like if they're not social, if they don't know how to like speak or how to be a debater, it helps mentor them in that space, and also provide opportunities for volunteering and civic engagement, or focusing on virtual campaigns and sending emails to legislators, and then that makes a huge difference.
Dear God.
Yeah, go for it.
Stay in touch.
But in 2026, there's a lot of complex issues happening all across the world. And to have hope not only in the systems of power here, but abroad, I think that shows that you are a glass half full kind of person, and I really respect that. I think that a lot of people in this space resonate with that idea as well, right? I think that when it comes to in, let's say, high school and involved the UN space, there is a lot of pessimism of what kind of opportunities will exist when I graduate high school, graduate college. Again, having that class that well, so I really appreciate that.
Oh,
And then there needs to be more awareness about the goals, because I'm pretty sure if you were to take a survey across the US of high school and college students, they're not going to know the sustainable development goals. They don't know what
So it's a whole curriculum surrounding something needs to be teaching. So when I was I got approached by teachers, and the teachers said, we need someone with passion. Teachers within, even know our students don't know what they mean, and they want someone from outside, not the teacher, but someone from outside to come and teach them and show them what it is. So I think we start by education, right? So we need to start by spreading the word. How do you spread the word? Bring someone to the school, or develop a curriculum, or pick up the curriculum that's already there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and bring it to the school.
We have it, we don't have it. We have experience.
From my personal experience, like if anyone saying like a NGO, like college board has it in their curriculum. That's not but
This experience create that nonprofit. It shows that you have an idea that you really care about. You have to be the one to take action on your own.
and they didn't know about it. So I think education is one thing, but I also think like besides education, it's supposed to be like after learning.
one guest that does whether you're doing a nonprofit or you're doing really amazing work with different.
What I've heard from you mentioned
How people can take action actually happens.
Another point I'd like to
Show up.
point out is that they did not bring up some great ideas, a lot of innovation, but there's not a way to like track where those ideas are. There could be like a digital platform where youth would essentially input their ideas, and those ideas could be essentially filtered by policymakers who are working in those respective SDGs. For example, let's say SDG 17, right, for like food and health. So if there could be like if youth contributes a policy that could be implemented at a national level, policymakers could potentially intervene and say, hey, I like this idea, I'd like to take this forward. But that idea cannot necessarily be put forward in person all the time. It could be like a digital platform, maybe led by the UN.
We asked a big question, everyone has a chance to share, taking notes. On the structure question.
From there, they'll take them to the.
Yep, exactly. Kind of like RFIs, like request for invitations. That I know NASA. I used to work with NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. And, yeah. No, I mean not braggadocious, but yes. NASA. Marshall. Yeah. So we would. I was actually responsible for putting out RFIs on behalf of NASA for information on ideas specifically from youth to 18 to 30 years. They would provide ideas on technology development, and those would be then seed funded by NASA to develop into a program. So that, I mean, something in the lines of that could be done by the UN. I think it's a very underutilized and it's such a simple thing, given everything is like digitalized right now, everything utilizes AI, so why not?
Okay, friends, I think we're gonna come back together as we get some of the different interventions. What I'm gonna ask of everyone is to identify someone in your group who's going to be able to report back and try to summarize some of the conversations that you all have had. Does that seem good?
Yes.
Great, resounding.
Got one yes.
No worries, you're good. Thank you for joining.
Okay. So we're gonna give our friends online 30 seconds. They're gonna pop back from their breakout room. And then we will be off to the races. So maybe we can kind of fold back in to the general shape that we were. General. Alrighty, so let's start with our friends online and hear first from you all, from the breakout groups that you were in. Do we have anybody who wants to report back to the whole team? And good to see you all. Please, Shania.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Feel free to unmute. Yep.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Ooh, okay, wonderful. Okay, so for my group, well, first to introduce.
Oh, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh, hello.
Little technical difficulties. We're gonna try, if you don't mind, we're gonna try to circle back in a second. Is that okay? Great. Anybody else from online who wants to report out to those here? Feel free to unmute and jump right in.
Hi, can you hear me?
Ava.
Yes. Okay, awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm Ava. I'm a Global Goals Ambassador.
Oh, do you think it's going through? I think we're having technical difficulties on our end, so we're gonna come back to our friends online. All right, sorry about that. And let's hear from those in the room. Do we have a hand to share? I saw 3 different groups, so maybe 3 reporting back. Don't be shy. All right, Alan, please.
Do you want me to stand or sit?
Whatever you like.
All right, I'll stand so everyone can see. Hi everyone, I'm Alan, Global Goals Ambassador. I had Emma, Olive, Rich, Anush, Harrison, and Graceland in my group. And there were 2 kind of overarching themes that we discussed. First off, more opportunities for young people to get involved, even if it's looking like volunteer roles. Like how I got involved was I ran for my local land use board, and that was for me. And not everyone has that similarity. So having more volunteer positions for young people to get involved, that's sort of what's missing right now between that and the connection. I think the second part that we discussed too is having respect for young people in these spaces. I think sometimes what we see is young people are looked down upon and are seen as kids or children, but really we're all colleagues. We're all in this together and we care a lot about these issues, and we bring different experiences to life at the table, and that's sort of what we bring, and that's sort of what's missing at the moment.
Great. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for your team and those contributions. Cassie.
Oh, all right. Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine, Cassie, either. I am UNA USA's youth co-chair of the Youth Affinity Group. I had a whole group of friends that I did not capture names of, so Alan got me there. But we mostly talked about the missing piece of education in both high school and college. The point was brought up that if you were to survey high school or youth across the US, that a lot of youth members would not be able to name all 16, 17 SDGs, 17. Perfect example. But we also talked about looking for legislation, policy advocacy, and a lot of youth promotion and working together. And a lot of times there is not the relationship between young people in these spaces. Additionally, let's see, we also talked about, did I miss anything? Y'all can jump in too. But we also talked about the network and that there needs to be a network between young people and their ideas in spaces. And now that AI is becoming more and more prevalent, just a way to store and house all of these ideas that policymakers would have access to.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can go.
You back here?
Yeah. I'm the Global Goals Ambassador to SDG 13, which is climate action. And our very small but mighty group, we had 2 people leave. but also to not take the advice of getting people's names out there. But we kind of tackled that second question a little more hands-on, so that conceptual framework that's missing, what can young people do to kind of close that gap? And so as much as we can talk about how we're missing from those spaces, a few points that were brought up is partnerships and thinking of partnerships as progressions. And so like what was discussed on the panel, you can have that one-on-one meeting, but if you're not following up, if you're not doing more events and hosting more engagement with them, that kind of doesn't go anywhere and that follows through. We talked about reframing that goal so that yes, for that one yes, that one acceptance you get through that email, there's 100 no's that come in, and how do you deal with that rejection? How do you come back stronger and build that partnership and say, this is how I've scaled up since the last time we talked, and this is how we can keep going forward. And understanding that really you need to have that bi-directional relationship and having that very clear plan of this is how my organization will help you, and in return, and here's how we can work together and achieve that same goal faster and together. So yeah, if there's anything I missed, feel free to jump in.
Great, partnerships as progression, I love that. And we're gonna try to give another shot for our friends online. Let's see. Are you on?
Just give one more second.
Oh.
But Ava, do you want to try speaking again? We can test it out.
Yes, for sure. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, awesome. So hi everyone, I'm Ava. I am a Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 14, which is Life Below Water. And so our conversation was not just geared towards life below water, but overall about institutions and youth engagement. And so we had a great conversation comparing both government and school boards' involvement in youth participation and their roles. And so we talked about the expansion of student board member positions and school boards, as well as student advisor positions, and those serving as a means to break down barriers between parents and families, and there's more governmental bodies. And then we also talked about briefly on the more government side of things, how students can get their start into leadership. Specifically within Mexico, we were talking about how a lot of students don't even know how to begin their advocacy journey, whether it's more on a school basis or even in their own school board. And so something that we proposed was lots of resources and support in order to make sure that students feel prepared to tackle that next step, and making sure that especially Title I schools or more rural locations have just as much attention as schools that might be from charter or even magnet backgrounds, and making sure that we have that equalized playing field for both students in Mexico, in the US, and just globally that are trying to get their start into leadership, and just using those school boards as methods for connecting students' families to government work.
Great, thank you so much. Other friends online?
I can hop in for, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'll do it really quick. I'll hop in for Life on Land. I'm the Global Goals Ambassador for that. My group had 3 big points that came up. The first was that they feel like a lot of decisions are made for them and not with them. And so the relationship is more symbolic than real, like than in, actual relationship. That a lot of the topics that institutions seem to be focusing on aren't as relevant to the youth. And then finally, we talked a little bit about how the youth have really grown up with the world of social media and how quickly we can communicate ideas. But in reality, institutions, particularly governments, move very, very slow. And so there's this disconnect there. And so creating ways to have quicker communication and more accurate communication is important.
That's great, thank you, Emily. Any other readouts from our friends online?
I can go next.
Please.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Shania Miller. I'm the Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 10, which is Reduce Inequalities. So in my group, we talked about how there's kind of 3 steps when it comes to being able to make real change or having that direct impact. And it kind of starts for us with education. And that means educating both yourself and those around you, becoming very educated on what you believe in and what you want to advocate for, because I think that's very much the first stepping stone for proper advocacy. And then we moved into local scale, local impact. What are you doing in your own community and how can you help there? And just taking the time to uplift those around you. And then eventually moving on to kind of a more national or international scale of impact to where you're involved for multiple years or you've had many partnerships and you're doing more than just like the surface level thing. So that's kind of the general spiel of things that we talked about.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for the contributions today, for being willing to bring that forward to us and provide your participation in what it looks like to try to close that gap. It is an active process for us to be doing exactly that. So it's critical that we all play our small role.